Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. We all know how stressful the college admission process can be. For the student, it is the first major decision made in their lifetime to date, coupled with the anxiety about the possibility of facing rejection. The pressure increases tenfold for those who will be first-generation college students. For the parents, caregivers, and families, this is seen as the best opportunity to attain a better life. In recent years, we have seen the lengths people will go through to get their student into the quote-unquote right school, from donating a new building or wing to even fabricating aspects of their application to increase their chances of admission. What these people fail to realize is that getting into the school is only half the battle. Students still have to be able to stay in, and cutting corners will adversely affect the student in the long run. Some will argue that they are merely leveling the playing field, giving their child the chance to stand out among others who may be as or more qualified. This is where our next guest comes in. Alan Coe is the founder and CEO of Cardinal Education, a company that works with students to help them become the type of student colleges clamor for. Mr. Coe has been an academic coach for over 20 years and specializes in admissions to elite private schools and institutions of higher learning, and has worked with both local and international students and families. Let's welcome Mr. Alan Coe to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me.
Since you have experience with both our domestic students and international students, is there any kind of a difference between how colleges review those international applications as opposed to local applicants?
Oh, absolutely. We have clients across the United States and on 6 continents. I actually just got back from a huge trip to Singapore, New Delhi, Mumbai, Istanbul, and Accra, Ghana, if you can believe that.
Yes.
We have a lot of clients out there. And so colleges are always assessing students according to a term called the local context. And so generally speaking, the more sophisticated a region is in terms of American university admissions, the higher the standards will be. So if you're applying from New York, that's pretty much the pinnacle of sophistication in everything. So New York students have to meet the highest requirements to be accepted to the same universities that their colleagues or peers from maybe West Virginia might have to meet.
Wow.
And in the same way, students from China, where there's a huge college consulting industry, they have higher standards to meet than, let's say, students from Indonesia, where it's not as well developed.
Wow. I think that's something that I would have never thought of, that based on where you're applying from can really determine the level of sophistication and quality of application that you would actually need to get into a school. I just thought it was, okay, I need to make sure that I have the high SATs and the high GPA in order to compete against other students from my own country. But if I have a particular number, let's say if I have a 90 average and a 1400 SAT, that still may not get me in if there's a student from, say, from West Virginia who has similar numbers. They're going to have an advantage over me because of the state that they're coming from.
That is correct. And that is why I have a job, to help explain these things to families.
Well, I'm pretty familiar with the college application process, obviously because I went through it myself and because I helped to guide other students through it as well. So I know that there are several criteria that colleges look at as far as the aforementioned SAT scores, the GPA, the rank in school, extracurricular activities, and so forth and so on. There are probably about 8 or 9 different criteria. Is there any criteria that may carry more weight to us in the eyes of a school than another one?
Sure. So I think you hit most of the big categories. And one thing I do want to add is, so the number one category is going to be your academics. And so most people think of that as SAT and GPA only. But another dimension I want to inform your readers about is course rigor. We meet with a number of families every year, and we have to deliver the unfortunate news. Your student doesn't qualify for XYZ schools, even though your child has a almost perfect GPA. And that's because maybe they never took calculus in high school, whereas some students might be taking calculus as a sophomore or junior. But your chances of getting into a top 25 university without calculus by senior year, I mean, they collapse.
Right.
So rigor is a really important element to how universities evaluate you.
So would that also be considered the type of courses you take? So if I had a general ed history course as compared to an AP global history course?
That is exactly what I'm speaking of. And so one of the most frequent questions we get is it better to get an A in that regular class or to get a B in that AP course? And if you're looking at the most competitive universities, they do prefer an A minus in the AP course, if at all possible. Mm-hmm. If you have to choose between a B in the AP class or an A in the regular course, a B in the AP class is better than the A in the regular course.
And I think that's something that's important for people to understand. Now, let's talk about how you go about coaching the students a little bit and their families, because let's say there's a student who they understand this completely. They know that they need to get into these higher rigor courses like AP or IB, International Baccalaureate courses, in order to be looked upon more favorably. But what happens if their school doesn't offer a whole menu of classes that they can take? What would be your advice in that situation?
So that's a really great question. And so remember, students are evaluated according to their local context. And so if your school just doesn't have a lot of offerings and you max those out, then they look at you as if you are someone with tremendous initiative. But we still need to compete against people who have more resources. So some things I might suggest to a student are community college classes. In many states, those courses have become free or are very low cost, or high school districts will even sponsor students taking a couple of them for free. And we also like different online courses, some of which are extremely affordable as well.
Now, there was this movie a number of years ago with the actor Kevin Spacey, and it doesn't matter what you may think of him. I'm not trying to get into all the political aspects regarding him, but there was a movie that he was in called 21. And in it, the main character in that movie, the protagonist, was trying to get into med school. And of course, and on the way, he was wrapped up in the whole world of gambling and playing blackjack and all of that. But one of the questions that the admissions officer to Harvard Med School asked him was, how can you wow me? So is that something that because all the people who are applying pretty much had the same type of application. They all had high GPAs. They all had high MCATs. Everything was stellar. So how do you separate yourself from the pack? So how do you wow the admissions officers? What advice would you give for that?
Sure. So first, I've never heard anyone say that, but they are absolutely thinking that. Harvard brags about how they reject more than 1,000 valedictorians a year. From what we can tell, if you're a top 10 university, 80% plus of your rejected students have all A's. Right. So in terms of differentiation, I think the first area where students need to think about differentiating themselves is intellectually. If you're interested in studying the same things as everybody else for the same reasons, and you haven't done anything to show that you might be better at it than others, that's going to be an area where you absolutely want to consider working on. So intellectual differentiation. If you're interested in political science, but it also might intersect with religious studies, you'd be better off choosing religious studies if that's what you're genuinely interested in, because the probability of being accepted for religious studies is substantially higher. Another area where we ask families to think about differentiation is leadership.
Okay.
Can they look themselves in the mirror and be able to say that they're the strongest leader in their class or their grade? Are they the strongest leader in recent history at that school? If the answer is yes, then you're in great shape. If the answer is no, then we want to start being analytical about why that is and what we can do about it.
So taking that question, that last piece right there into consideration, we want to start thinking about how we can turn into or take advantage of those particular areas. How soon should students and families start preparing really for college applications? It seems that junior year might be a little too late to really start thinking about putting your applications together. So how soon should they begin preparing, and what would the process potentially look like for the successful candidate?
Sure. So we actually turn away families who are approaching us in 12th grade reflexively, and we turn away a lot of 11th graders as well. Because most people think of high school as 4 years, but the admissions decisions are really made based on your 9th, 10th, and 11th grade accomplishments. And so because of that, the right time for a lot of families to engage with us, at least at a very minimal level, is in middle school.
Oh, wow.
So Kevin, we actually find a lot of ambitious kids who have big dreams, but no one told them about rigor. If you're not a big reader in middle school, you actually cannot take those AP courses in high school in history and English. If you do, your GPA will take it on the chin in a way that would be counterproductive. Same thing with like math. They start tracking students usually in 5th or 6th grade. And once you're on a certain track, it's actually devilishly hard to get to the next track. It usually involves summer school, maybe summer school and tutoring. Maybe you need a teacher mentor as well to support you to jump up a track. Because you're trying to accomplish in 8 weeks what somebody would have 9 months to do. Right. So the older you are, the harder it is to jump up a math track. So if your child is interested in engineering, we don't need to have a huge, long strategy session in 7th grade about how to get your child into the best university possible. But I do want to know, what math class is your child taking? Because if your child is in the wrong math class in 7th grade, it may not be possible to get into a top 25 university in 12th grade.
Wow. That puts a lot of, pressure on the families now to think that, because there was a time, we thought about maybe 9th grade. When you enter high school, that's when you really you buckle down to get yourself together, because, your transcript is going to only reflect 9th, 10th, and the first half of 11th grade by the time you send that off with your applications. So we know that that portion of high school is important, but now it's important to even go back even further into middle school, 7th and 8th grade, to start preparing. And I think where some schools are actually doing a good job with this is those schools that offer, in the case of New York, Regents exams. So
yes.
if you're able to take like an algebra Regents in the 7th grade, or you take a living environment Regents in the 8th grade, at least you're taking those classes that will put you on the right track, hopefully, to take even more rigorous classes when you do get to high school.
Yes. We think those exams, they're not the end all be all of who you are, what your potential is, but they're a very good early indicator of whether you're on track according to customary standards. So if you want to go to one of the top schools and study something in STEM, theoretically, your math should also be amongst the top.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is academic coach and founder and CEO of Cardinal Education, Mr. Alan Coe. So let's shift gears just a little bit, because I want you to explain to our listeners and talk a little bit about what you do and what your company offers. So describe the services your company offers, as well as your track record for getting students into the colleges of their choice.
Sure. So we're an admissions consulting. Well, okay. Well, let me start again. We're an educational consulting firm, and we offer admissions consulting, academic coaching, tutoring, and test prep. So tutoring and test prep, very self-explanatory. Academic coaching is about the skills and character and attitude necessary to be a successful student. So this is more like time management skills, study skills, organizational skills. And we work with a lot of students on their motivation, because sometimes you might have the intelligence, you might have the skills, but you may not understand the ramifications of your decisions, that you may not understand what are the benefits you may receive. You know, university admissions really rewards unnatural maturity. And so just by having positive conversations with students about where they are, how they compare, and how that affects their futures, you can actually inspire kids to really want more for themselves. So that's our academic coaching practice. And where I spend most of my time now as a college consultant and private school consultant is, what are the latest trends in admissions, and how can you live your life with genuine passion but still check the boxes in a way that admissions officers would find you compelling? And so these are not necessarily the same thing, unfortunately. And so where a great college consultant will try to listen very well to a student. What is she about? What is she like? What does she want? And then do the job of educating them about, okay, for the things that you want, here's what they're looking for. And then we can start talking about whether their goals are even really goals that they truly want. And if they are, how do we go about achieving them?
So when you're doing the academic coaching piece of it, whether it's for admissions in whatever level of schooling is for admissions to, do students often share with you their reasons why they put a particular school on their radar and choose a particular major?
I would love to say they do, but Kevin, I think admissions has become scary enough for a lot of kids that many students who are ambitious don't actually research as much as you would think they do. And so part of what we will do is help the students through a very structured process of research and really ask themselves tough questions about what really matters to them, as opposed to what have they been conditioned to tell adults by adults.
Yeah, I work in higher education as well, and I'm on a committee that reviews students who have been put on academic probation, and they're filing appeals and so forth. And we come across a lot of students who have the major of engineering, but they fail calculus, and they're failing the same basic engineering course semester after semester, but yet they still keep that major. So I always wondered what would make somebody choose that major if they're not good at math.
So it could be a number of things. It could be parental pressure. It could be some level of common sense where they see these careers are the most lucrative, have the most security. But also, Kevin, sometimes it's a maturity issue where they genuinely are like mechanical or into building and fixing things and want to be engineers, but they haven't connected the grit that you need to solve equations. How does that translate to being someone who is considered high potential in the engineering field? So sometimes the reasons for why they're interested in a career, they're kind of missing what is required to be successful in that career by people in that field.
What would make a student and her family want to seek an academic coach? What is your typical client look like?
Our typical client, generally speaking, is incredibly affluent. We're working with some of the wealthiest families in the world, and they want to improve their odds at university admissions. That is the only common theme across all of our clients. Different people, some people will come to us and they say, look, if I can get into any SUNY, we know that would be a miracle. Please help me. And then there are other families who say, look, we've had 5 generations of our family go to Yale, and this is it for us. And so can you please help us figure out how to make it happen? So anytime someone has a big goal relative to where they are currently standing, those are the families who are most motivated to come to us because we are one of the most expensive college consultants in the world.
Recently, the Supreme Court had had a ruling regarding affirmative action and the biographical reporting that schools can or don't have to make. So describe for our listeners what the circumstances around that ruling are, if you're able to, and two, what impact do you think that such a ruling would have on admissions going forward?
So there was a relatively recent Harvard case where the judge affirmed certain affirmative action policies to a certain extent. So not much changed after that. Harvard has been to the Supreme Court again more recently, along with UNC, Chapel Hill in a separate case. Those two decisions have not yet come out. And so these court cases are about affirmative action and, generally speaking, how different minorities, different ethnic groups are perceived by admissions officers, and any sort of advantages or disadvantages people think might come from their ethnicity. So the two biggest court cases, they have not yet been decided, and everybody in my industry is looking on in rapt anticipation of what is to come. No one knows.
I would assume that if there's a ruling that would in any way, I guess, strike down the affirmative action policies, that if a school does not have to list what the background is of their student, their clientele, is that going to have an impact on who they admit?
It is really hard to say right now. So there are some interesting things that happen with university admissions. So in terms of affirmative action, one thing that is very interesting is over 40% of the entire Ivy League's African Americans are first or second generation immigrants from Africa or the West Indies, the Caribbean specifically. So that's over 40% of the Ivy League. So that's a whole nother conversation. This is not the right forum, but admissions is complicated. And so we don't know what the decisions will be. Everyone is speculating wildly about what will happen. You know, will they start cutting athletic recruiting? Will they start cutting legacy admissions? Because at elite universities, at least, athletic recruiting actually aids Caucasians more than any other ethnic group by far.
Wow.
And so same thing with legacy admissions. It's a boost for, generally speaking, Caucasian families more often than not.
So it almost seems as if, and I'm sure you correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems as if colleges may tend to focus more on the international student as opposed to the domestic student as far as getting those numbers up. Because if you look at, again, the numbers you just gave us, the 40% of the Ivy League students who are of African descent are from international countries. They're not from the United States for the most part.
Oh, but they are Americans. So they're immigrants just like me, whose parents maybe were born in another country, but they were born in the United States.
Okay.
So that's why that thread is a little bit controversial amongst some people.
Yeah, I can imagine it being so. So again, what would be a typical, if there is such, I'm sure there's no such thing as a typical process that you would take a student through, because every situation is going to be unique to that individual and their family. But from the point of when you're first contacted, let's say the child is just entering high school. So they're going into the 9th grade in September. And now they come to you, say, we want to get into this school A. We know what the rigor is. What do we need to do to get there? What kind of plan would you put out for them, or how would you go about devising a plan for them?
First thing we want to do is assess the academic trajectory for the rest of high school. Is a student even on track to take the right classes and get the right grades? If not, is there any sort of tutoring or academic coaching we need to bring to bear to make that possible? Is there any summer school? There's a lot of advising to do regarding academics. Once we are confident about the academics, then we start turning towards leadership. Are you involved in the community? Are you playing sports? Are you volunteering? Are you just taking advantage of the different opportunities that your school, your town, your county, your state are providing you that might be close to some of your interests? And we create plans for, because you only have so many hours a week. So we create plans for what are your activities that we think are going to be your crown jewels, and then what are your activities that, you do for fun and they're really genuinely rewarding for you, but we're not going to write your essays about them. And then we want to make sure that we have the right time allocation, and we want to create milestones. So here's where you are right now. Let's say you're a freshman and you're a freshman class representative. If student government is important to you, how do we try to lay a course to have a high probability of getting to be student body president or vice president by the time you're a senior? And we'll do this across your entire portfolio of activities. And then once we start that conversation up, then we're really focusing on the intellectual differentiation. How are you intellectually different from the other students? Because at the end of the day, everyone who's applying to these elite schools, they have the same grades. They have pretty much the same test scores. And so in terms of intellectually, are you applying to majors that are very competitive? If so, what do you need to be considered more competitive? Are you interested in majors that maybe you can split the difference, where you could theoretically call it behavioral economics and choose to study economics, but that would be very competitive. Or you might be able to look at sociology, which has the economics of the sociology of stratification, which is also studying economics from a different lens. And so we want to try to figure out, where are you intellectually differentiated in terms of your interests? And then what are the activities that we can put together that really tell that story?
Wow, it sounds like it's a very detailed process, but it's a process that has to be detailed because, again, you're talking about really differentiating for every family that you're working with. But we would definitely like to thank our guest today, academic coach and founder and CEO of Cardinal Education, Mr. Alan Coe, for coming on our show today.
Thank you, Kevin. Happy to be here.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.